Well, thank you so much, Volker, for inviting me and for organizing these talks. As we discussed, it takes quite some time and effort to put this together. So I really appreciate you doing this for the community, for all of us. And I'm very happy to be here today with you. I'm going to present results of a report that we recently published with Reshaping Work. But as I present the report, I will also share some of the insights on the future of work and platforms that I have acquired throughout the past few years of researching this topic. But before I get started, let me just tell you briefly about what we do at Reshaping Work so you have an idea. We are a foundation, a nonprofit organization that took off in 2016, and it was very random how we started. It was about the time that there was a hype about Airbnb and Uber and food delivery platforms, and people were starting to talk about it, starting to increasingly use these platforms, but there was no place where a community of enthusiasts and researchers could actually come together to talk about these topics. So we put up an event, and we had no idea whether we're going to even get 20 people in a room when we started, but we immediately had an idea that it needs to be multi-stakeholder, that we really need to bring together companies and unions and even workers themselves. So we actually went on the street recruiting Uber drivers and food delivery riders to get them to come and share what they think. And we actually had 150 people in the audience for the very first edition of Reshaping Work event. And from then on, it grew into a foundation that hosts a number of activities from events, both we have our flagship event in Amsterdam on biannual basis. We also facilitate dialogue among these diverse actors. We conduct research and we make policy recommendations. So just a recap of what we have done since 2016 is we hosted 5 global events on the topics of platform economy and artificial intelligence at work. We also have independently organized events that anyone can do in their country. So we had an event in Sweden, Spain, and Serbia. And following COVID, we also had dozens of online events. And we also hosted 3 editions of Reshaping Work Dialogue, which is an initiative that the report originated from, the one that I will present to you today. So the report that we published just now recently at the end of January is an outcome of 8 months long discussions that we facilitated with a number of different stakeholders, from companies to startups to unions and so on. And this is actually the first time that I will represent this report more extensively. So kind of exclusive peek into it. But why now? Why are we publishing this report back to what truly matters for the future of work now? Well, those of you that are following the platform space may have heard of the Platform Work Directive. And Platform Work Directive is probably the boldest piece of regulation that is coming up in the European Union. It has been put forward by the European Commission. And the primary objective of this directive is to improve working conditions of platform workers. So we're talking about anyone from ride-hailing drivers, food delivery riders, but also high-skilled workers on platforms like Upwork, TopTal, and so on. And while nobody objects that we need more protections for platform workers, there are disagreements about the tools to achieve that protection. Moreover, AI is being increasingly used at a workplace, another topic that we need to address. The use of remote monitoring and surveillance tools surged 108% in the US and EU in the first months of the pandemic. And this is quite concerning because it's threatening workers' autonomy, but also their well-being at a workplace. Furthermore, global youth employment dropped almost 3 times more than adult employment in 2020. But post-pandemic labor market integration is not our biggest concern, actually. The pandemic caused a 25% increase in anxiety and depression, which has disproportionately affected youth and women. So this report comes at a very interesting time in Europe, where we address these three major topics. So platform work, AI at a workplace, and youth employment and workplace well-being. And for the sake of time, I will focus on the first two thematic priorities today, platform work and AI at work, but I do encourage you to see our report if you're also interested in the youth employment topic. What was our approach in arriving at the findings of this report, which is primarily the policy recommendations? So we brought it together, 32 organizations from companies, unions, think tanks, and so on. We hosted roundtable discussions over a period of 8 months, and our team at Reshaping Work consolidated insights, and we also conducted independent research to arrive at policy recommendations. So here you can see some of the organizations that have participated in the initiatives. It is an inclusive network, so we welcome both big big organizations, but also micro businesses, and not just big unions, but also grassroots worker organizations from all over Europe. So let's start with platform work. What are some of the challenges that we are facing, and what do we in this report suggest there should be a way forward, primarily on the policy level? Well, there is no doubt that platform work is growing. A number of digital platforms has increased 5-fold in the past decade. European Commission estimates that some 28 million people in the EU work through labor platforms, and this number is about to double by 2025. And while platform work is familiar to us in the, like I said, ride-hailing and food delivery sector, something we use on daily basis, it is actually spreading across industry sectors. Also when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to education. So we are going to see platformization of many, many more industries. And that's why this topic is very important to address, so that we make sure that the platform work is developing in a direction that is actually fair and equitable for everyone involved. So I want to show you what do we mean by platform and how platform works. So we have platform owners, right, at the center stage. They're owners of the technological architecture. And on the one side, we have service providers. Those are providers of services such as rides, parcel delivery, graphic design, and so on. And then we have customers. So those are end users of the service, such as passengers, for example. And what the platform owners do, they enable this exchange of value and data between these different parties in the transaction. However, and we also have other stakeholders, investors, policymakers, society at large, and so on. However, platform owners are at the center stage and have a unilateral power when it comes to decision making. So although what they do affects service providers and customers, platform owners at the end make main decisions. And most of the service providers at the moment are independent contractors, so they're self-employed, but they do not have decision-making rights. And also we know that the most of the value that is created on platforms is created based on the skills, so resources that workers possess. If you think about Upwork, for instance, the largest network, the largest marketplace for services such as graphic design, website development, anything you can think of. But Upwork, of course, doesn't have any of those skills internally, but service providers, the freelancers on the platforms do. So even though the platform does not actually possess resources or skills, it does make decisions that affect lives of these people. But people often think that platforms are bad and they only act in their own interest, and they act at the expense of these other two parties in the transaction, service providers and customers. But actually, that is not true. Platforms do have a way of arriving at optimal solutions, because at the end of the day, what matters to platforms is that the exchange of goods or services happens. So they have a way of giving enough incentive to both of those sides to make this transaction happen. So for example, think about food delivery. When it's really bad weather, all of you are probably going on your phones, or you're lazy, you don't want to cook, so you're trying to order food, but it's difficult to deliver food in these times. It's snowing or raining or so on. So what these food delivery platforms do is they increase prices, compensating workers more to get out on the street and deliver food, and also customers can get served and get a food at a doorstep. So they have a way of finding solutions to these situations, and it is unlikely the food delivery riders acting alone would be able to manage that in such a way. Also, what is often thought of is that platforms set prices, which they shouldn't, because these workers are independent, they're self-employed, so they should actually set their own prices. But this also is not always to the benefit of workers, because workers cannot act in sync. They don't have data on the aggregate level. Think about Airbnb, for example. Airbnb lets hosts set their own prices of houses, right? But what research has actually shown is that only professional hosts, so those that have multiple properties, are able to set adequate prices. All the other hosts actually set suboptimal prices, so they're not able to optimize the full value potential they can get out of it. That's why Airbnb now gives price recommendations. They tell hosts, oh, you're trying to rent your place during New Year's Eve. Prices are 40% higher or whatever during that time. So it's trying to actually assist hosts in pricing adequately. So I just wanted to explain that it is sometimes misconceptions that platform only act in their own interest. It is in platform interest for the transaction to happen. And they do have ways of arriving at these optimal solutions. But platforms have also been found to protect shareholder interests at the expense of workers. For example, back in 2017, Uber was accused of playing psychological tricks on drivers. When a driver was about to stop working and log off, they would get a notification on Uber, are you sure you want to stop working? You are just 2 rides away from making your earnings goal for today. So they were using these psychological nudges to incentivize them to stay on the app. And this is to their disadvantage, right? If a driver has already been working for 10 hours or so, he's tired and he doesn't want to work anymore. And he's posing a danger to himself and also to others on the road. Of course, it has changed since that time. And ride-hailing platforms actually now many of them require drivers to stop working after 10 hours. But I just wanted to give you an example that we have from the past, that we know that platforms do not always behave in the best interest of workers, because at the end of the day, they want to meet the bottom line and satisfy the shareholder interests. So what are some of the major challenges that we are seeing and that the policies are trying to tackle? Well, first of all, a number of workers is believed to be bogusly self-employed. What does that mean? That means that they are under control and supervision of platforms or their algorithms, but they don't enjoy the same rights as self-employed. I gave you an example of price setting, that traditionally self-employed should be setting their own prices, which is not the case in platforms. They also don't enjoy the same social protections as employees. So bogusly self-employed means that they're being treated as employees. So some platforms tell them what to wear to work. They don't allow them to build their own client base or so on. So they're being treated as employees, but they are not, and they don't enjoy the same rights. On the other hand, the European Commission and the regulators understand that platform work enabled quick labor market entry, so we have increased job opportunities. It is very much appreciated among younger populations, such as students, for example, who can enjoy the flexible work arrangements. So students appreciate the flexibility it's giving them. Then in a sense, tonight, if they're free, they can go on a platform like Temper, which is a platform for hospitality services, and do shift in a bar. So they do appreciate that. They appreciate the chances to have some side hustle. So the challenge is really to find a balance between security, so having social security, and having flexibility is something that is being appreciated by younger generations. So the question is, can we have both? So what is that we recommend in the report? We recommend that employment status indicators should be clarified. So at the moment, in the latest proposal, the European Commission has suggested a criteria whereby if you take if you take of two of the criteria, you will be reclassified. Workers will be reclassified to employees. What is now happening at the European Parliament, however, seems like the criteria will be stripped altogether, meaning that workers will be assumed to be employees. Platform workers will be assumed to be employees unless proven otherwise. So these recent developments in the European Parliament come after our report, but we do recommend, as discussions move forward, that these criteria of what would reclassify workers be clarified. We also suggest that there needs to be a clear rule book that platforms can use to rebut the presumption or to prove that their workers are genuinely self-employed. And this is really important because not all workers want to be employed. So we have a number of studies that surveyed workers and they asked them, do you want to be employees? A number of them actually prefer these flexible work arrangements. But this does not mean that these workers should not be protected. They should still enjoy social protection. So we believe that social protection should be extended to all workers, regardless of their legal status. And as we go on with our Reshaping Work Dialogue initiative, the next what we are going to tackle is actually the ways we can achieve these universal social protection. You can imagine, for instance, us coming up with some base level of social protection, something we agree that everyone should have. And then there can be add-ons like vacation pay or so on. In general, things that kind of fall at the cost of society should be included in the base social protection. So, for example, occupational health insurance, because if you hurt yourself at work, then you're a burden for the social system. So we believe that that should be available to everybody, regardless of whether they're self-employed or in employment status. And also to adopt a dedicated legal instrument to extend the provision of algorithmic management to cover all workers who are subjected to automated monitoring. At the moment, the European Commission believes that only platform workers should be protected, but we believe that a number of workers, including employees, are subjected to AI and should be protected. I want to now move on to the second important topic we're addressing in the report, which is also related very much to the topic of platforms, and that is how artificial intelligence is used at a workplace. We have 4 dimensions on how we would assess how AI is being used at a workplace. And those are fair treatment, work autonomy, occupational safety and health, and social dialogue. So first of all, everyone should be given equal rights and opportunities, irrespective of gender, age, ethnicity, and so on. And these discriminatory practices is something that we see when it comes to AI being used, and I will touch upon more of that. Work autonomy. So the environments should be characterized by a fair treatment. So in particular, give autonomy, self-determination, and opportunities for creativity to workers. Occupational health and safety, so safe and healthy workplaces, which can preserve workers' health and mental health. And again, this is being jeopardized by the algorithm. And finally, social dialogue is a key for achieving human-centric future of work. We have a number of examples where AI is taking middle management level positions and actually making decisions for these workers. So having a human-centric approach and involving workers in decision-making is essential. So what are some of the major challenges that we should be tackling when it comes to AI? Well, AI, for one, can aggravate existing discriminatory practices. For example, Amazon's algorithm for recruiting workers has been found to favor male applicants so the algorithm would go through the CVs and then make a selection for the HR for the next rounds. And this algorithm was favoring applicants that had male characteristics. So as you can imagine, this is actually aggravating already gender disbalance that we have at the workplace. And these unethical practices can be traced to several factors: the biased data sets, the biased trainers or programmers, or algorithmic blindness to workers' individual traits, which we had in the case of Amazon. Second problem is that ratings outsource middle management power to customers. So when you use any of these services, you get a ride via ride-hailing app, you order food, you hire a graphic designer, you're being asked to rate these people. And this rating actually influences lives of these people. A good example is food delivery. When you order a food at your doorstep, you're going to get a message to rate the delivery rider. But these ratings are often only 1 to 5 star ratings. And if you give a 1-star rating, which is a bad rating, it cannot be traced to whether you actually were not happy with your food, the food just tasted bad, so it's something the restaurant did, or you're not happy with your delivery. But it has been found that the rating customers give actually influences the number of jobs these workers will subsequently get. And very often, these workers don't understand why an algorithm has made a choice and why are they no longer getting work. So unsupervised decision-making, with algorithms making decisions, can sanction workers solely based on clients' assessment. I don't know why I have this. And finally, use of gamification to increase productivity is a huge problem. So surpassing obstacles, attaining goals, collecting rewards are all manifestations of gamification that is being used at a workplace. And game-like design of labor processes may actually coerce workers to invest more effort than they actually should be to complete the tasks. And rewards are very often meaningless, such as digital badges, or even worse, having more work the next week. So this can lead to behaviors where workers take on risks only for the sake of satisfying the criteria of the game. And finally, algorithmic nudging. So where algorithm gives certain tips, such we had an example of notifications for how they can earn more, earning goals if they keep working more. So algorithms can rely on huge amounts of data and actually trace a personal behavior of a worker and identify all the other workers with similar behavior and use that in order to incentivize them to behave in a certain way. So what are the recommendations that we give in our report in this regard? So first of all, we think the policymakers should encourage workers to exercise their data protection and privacy rights already outlaid in GDPR. So we have a number of rights, such as right to be informed, right to access, right to rectification. They're already part of existing regulations, such as GDPR, but they are not being utilized to the extent. And one problem for that is that a lot of them are just too difficult to comprehend. or difficult to understand for workers. Sometimes simply because they're doing this work on the side. They may be doing them once every 2 weeks, and they don't want to spend time trying to comprehend these complex pieces of regulation. So in this regard, we think that the rights and how to exercise these rights should be presented to workers in explainable formats, such as toolkits and blueprints. We should also encourage AI designs to take into account gender, race, ethnicity, and so on. And of course, data sets free of errors are not feasible, but biases and prejudice embedded in them can be minimized. And finally, it is not enough just to encourage people. We also need to implement inspection and auditing of AI system and dissemination in order to encourage good AI practices. So in this sense, we may consider having a third party that would actually evaluate and audit algorithms before they are put into place. So this concludes the key points of the report that I wanted to present to you. Of course, feel free to access the report where you have much more in-depth analysis of these matters. But now I very much look forward to the discussion.